20 years ago this spring, Lyndon Johnson was president. The Beverly Hillbillies was big on TV. MasterCharge was sending out its very first cards. And in San Francisco, Gray Line started a new bus tour, the Hippie Hop Tour, right down the middle of Haight Street.
The hippies is often a strange world in which they live in. They take many trips, and the trip of the hippies is generally an unusual one. Favorite pastimes of the hippies, besides taking drugs, are demonstrations and partying, seminars, and groups of discussions. And marijuana, of course, with LSD, is being used.
It was a different way of life, a place where the world ran on love instead of money, where drugs were sometimes handed out for free, and free food was ladled out down the street in the park. Early in the spring, some hippie organizers and enlightened shopkeepers had begun planning for summer, a summer of love, they decided to call it, where there would be free concerts and shows and lectures and celebrations every day. And what really got the word out was this silly song, written by outsiders, cashing in on the San Francisco phenomenon.
The kids out in the Midwest and various places, they had heard about all this by word of mouth. They knew nothing was really happening for them where they were, and they were kind of hungry and looking for images. The era we had just come out of was the Eisenhower years, where the buildings were gray, the suits were gray, the people were gray, and it had a lot to do with bringing color back into people's lives.
As spring turned to summer, Haight Street was inundated with runaways. Police later estimated 75,000 young people had passed through the Haight, each looking for peace and love and a place to spend the night. The establishment didn't have a clue. Neither did a young newscaster named Art Brown.
You play anything besides the sweet potato?
Yes, the drums, conga drums, and trumpet. Yeah, and I go up in the mountains and yell now and then.
You do what?
Go up in the mountains and yell.
The establishment fought back the only way it knew how. Police were ordered to get those stoned-out children off the street and back home where they belonged.
I was just walking down the street. They said, hey, guys, come here, you know. So we come over there, and he says, you got any ID? And I said, yes, I do, and I showed it to him. I told him I was 16, and they said, okay, just get in the wagon.
What are you doing in the Haight-Ashbury?
Well, like I was just living here, you know, finding out what's happening, you know, what everybody's doing, you know, their thing and everything. I'm running away from being where I don't want to be. I'm coming to where I want to be. And when I get there, they keep taking me away, and I'm getting sick of this.
This is Officer Sullivan of the San Francisco Police Department. It's 2 o'clock in the morning here, and we just picked up your son, Eric, wandering the streets here in San Francisco. Are you aware of the fact he is in San Francisco? The area in which he was in is, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco, sir, but you've heard of it?
Michael Carey ran away from Pontiac, Michigan. He was 15.
Basically, what I ran away from was my family, getting beat. And when I came here, I mean, I was just showered with affection, I was okay. I was somebody, and people cared, which I wasn't used to at home.
In the summer of '67, officers Mike Wilcox and Richard Leon were walking the Haight Street beat.
Picking them up, we pick them up by the busloads almost. And especially in the midnights, you hit all the abandoned buildings around there, and one guy would take it over and he'd charge 50 cents to everybody who came in to sleep there.
Mostly it was the young kids, 14 years old, 13 years old, maybe 15, that were really coming out and sticking around. And the older ones would take advantage of them, either sexually or with drugs, or take all the money they had, and that was it. Use them up and spit them out.
But Haight Street was the place to be, where it was all happening. A parade of paisley, bells, and bare feet. And as one chronicler wrote, the biggest LSD party in history.
Anything you wanted to be that summer, you could be. Any wish that you made would come true. And it did for a lot of people.
Bonnie Knight, for one. She'd just run away from her home in the marina.
I remember incredible amount of free psychedelic drugs that people used to just hand out. I remember a man saying to me, put out your hands, and I put out one hand, and he said, hands up. And I put out 2 hands, and he opened a bag of cough drops and filled my hands completely to the top with 30, 40 cough drops. And he said, they're all laced with LSD. Share them and spread the joy.
A lot of drugs, acid, speed, mescaline, pot, banana peels, all was something new to try. And listen to the music. The musicians were experimenting too. The new Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album had songs about fixing a hole in your mind and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Obvious references to acid trips.
These musicians involuntarily became their leaders, and if it was the Dead or Janis or Quicksilver. But rock and roll became the soundtrack to those times.
It was a fleeting moment to me because it was followed by such terrible years of death and mayhem and confusion and anarchy. You know, it was the flash of a dream that is yet to come true.
Tomorrow night, the shattering of the dream and how hard drugs destroyed the hate. I'm Gary Kauf, and that's segment 2 for tonight.
So much happened so fast that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to figure it out.
It was all over in a flash, that beautiful summer full of promise and hope, the dawn of a new civilization, a community based on sharing and caring for one another, blasted apart. The heroin dealers and the speed pushers moved in, and their violence and paranoia came too.
An awful lot of violence started taking place on the street, things that we didn't have before, and people were getting stabbed and shot and beaten up. So I think that scared away a lot of the kids, and they decided to move on.
The Summer of Love hadn't even lasted out the summer. In late August, the first drug murder in the Haight. That brought the police in hard.
They couldn't tell the difference between a flower child and a speed freak. They couldn't tell the difference between the positive aspects and the negative aspects, and they tended to try to suppress all of it. And then I think the evolution of the drug culture, the hard drug culture, was a very destructive force.
Then there was the war. The protests had begun. The music and the musicians were being politicized.
And it's 1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. Next stop is Vietnam.
The world, war, drugs, police, repression, Nixon, Vietnam, reality setting in. You can't just be naive children for your whole life.
And it's going to take experts in history and media to sort it out, because we can't dare to go into the next century without knowing what happened.
It was a noble experiment, and we had a great time doing it, but it was just part of the growing process.
Any love that was left was snuffed out by the tax squad, bashing hippie heads in a small street riot early the next year. The assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy later that year finished it off, and the Haight went into a steep, steep decline. In just a few months, the most visible part of the 60s rebellion had become the worst ghetto slum. But the ideals of those long-haired kids didn't all die. Some were eventually adopted by society.
In 1966 or 67, if you said that the food you eat is poisoning you, you were some kind of a weird health nut and so on and so forth. But yet, virtually everyone's concerned with that now. Okay. The concerns of the hippies have become the concerns of everyone.
As for that world of peace and love, well, we're still working on that. Timothy Leary, remember him, the acid guru? He thinks we'll get there yet.
The peace and the prosperity and the tolerance and the goodwill that was expressed in the Summer of Love will become politically visible when the baby boomers start taking the country over by the weight of the ballot, which is 88 or 92. And certainly by the year 2000, all the old guard will be gone. Baby boomers, the kids that were there at the Haight-Ashbury and were in the Vians and the Love-Ins, will have total political control of this country.
Leary, the man who used to preach, turn on, tune in, drop out, take acid, now selling software in Beverly Hills and still waiting for the next coming.
Turn on, tune in, and take over.
So what did happen to those tie-dyed teenagers out to change the world and found a new civilization? Well, some of them, a few thousand maybe, got out of the city and moved north, way north, to places like Garberville.
It's calm and it's easy to get along here. You can be unusual here and nobody cares.
I moved up here because it was right.
The land was cheap, the air clean, and the country absolutely beautiful. So they sold off those old hippie vans and bought some good four-wheel drive pickup trucks. That was the late 60s. Now, 15, 20 years later, some of those aging hippies still have their long hair and their high ideals. Perhaps their most visible achievement is Beginnings Alternative School, started in 1973. There were rumors around that marijuana money helped build the school and community center next door, which infuriates its director. He says it was almost all donated materials and volunteer sweat. The school curriculum conforms to state and county standards, but it covers a whole lot more than just reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Just 2 squares of dots represents enough firepower to destroy all the large and medium-sized cities in the world.
That's sick. That's too much.
Back in town, Dave Katz runs an alternative energy business. Big business in these parts where electricity lines stop at the foot of the hill. Katz sold the Creekwater-driven turbine that provides all the electrical power to run this house. Linda Ostro-Dillon and her mate built the house from redwood lying around on their land. Wood the loggers cut and discarded decades ago when they cleared this land.
We don't need to live in such a beautiful house, you know, personally, but in a certain way for others to see that you don't have to give up anything to live in harmony with nature.
Kathy Daisy and Billy Bachman sell yarn and wool products they spin themselves. Wool they comb out of Angora rabbits. Not enough to live on yet, but they say they're getting there. Then there's an alternative health center started by some Haight-era hippies, machine shops, a solar pyramid place. Even the executive director of the town chamber of commerce is a former long hair.
Head hair down to my waist, wore my beads.
You do still see plenty of long hairs on this street, and it is a hippie stronghold. But these hippies are not the millionaire pot farmers Garberville has become known for, and they're tired of every news story portraying them as such, and their town as a dope den.
The media has come up to report on marijuana in camp, and they generalize to the point where you think there's somebody with a submachine gun behind every bush and under every rock.
Certainly we still have a lot of marijuana being grown still today, but not near the violence and other related crimes that we had at one time. I'd say today in 1987 that we are reasonably pleased and satisfied with the population of this county.
Now the town is trying to build itself up as a tourist attraction. There's a summer arts festival and an annual reggae event. The fishing's said to be great, or just drive up and take it easy a while. Up here, the hippies are running the establishments. In fact, they are the establishment. I'm Gary Kauf, and that's segment 2 for tonight.
That Summer of Love series was edited by Bob Shaw and David Martin. Segment 2 producer Abigail Sterling and Jennifer Cannon spent the long hours hunting down the right people and that old Haight-Ashbury footage for the series, and we'd like to thank them all.